Welcome to Cinema Bites, your go-to for movie recaps in a flash. Big twists, epic moments, all in just minutes. The movie begins in 1944 during World War II in the Pacific Ocean. We see an American plane crash and get destroyed. The pilot of the plane manages to jump out and save his life. He notices that the enemy's plane also crashes. The Japanese pilot survives, and the American pilot runs toward him, trying to kill him by shooting him. However, none of the bullets hit the Japanese pilot, and the American pilot runs out of ammunition. He starts running as the Japanese pilot points his weapon at him, but the Japanese pilot also runs out of bullets. The Japanese pilot chases after the American pilot into the jungle. Eventually, they reach a cliff, forcing the American to fight. The Japanese pilot has a sword, while the American fights unarmed. The Japanese pilot overpowers the American in the fight and is about to kill him when suddenly a giant gorilla strikes the ground with its hand. Both men are terrified and stop fighting. The story then shifts to 1973, where we meet two scientists named Bill and Brooks. Bill and Brooks meet with a government official and show him a satellite image of an island shaped like a skull. They explain that this island is unexplored and request permission to investigate it. They mention that the island is unusual because planes that fly over it crash and ships that pass near it sink. The government official is not interested and dismisses them, but Bill and Brooks persist, explaining that the Russians are also interested in exploring the island and could reach it within 3 days. They argue that they need to act quickly and get ahead of the Russians. Eventually, the official contacts General Packard and requests that he accompany the scientists and their team to Skull Island. General Packard is initially reluctant as he was planning to take a vacation, but he agrees to the mission. Bill and Brooks then approach a retired Air Force officer named James, who is skilled in tracking and has experience in the jungle. They explain the mission to him and offer him money for his assistance. James considers the mission dangerous and demands 5 times the original payment, which they agree to. James asks what they are specifically looking for, but Bill tells him they need his expertise in exploring dangerous areas. Next, we meet a photographer named Mason, who learns about the Skull Island mission and requests to join to document the exploration with her camera. She is accepted into the mission. The entire team gathers at the port to board a ship for the journey. The soldiers accompanying them are unhappy as they were supposed to be on leave. A NASA representative named Victor is also part of the team. Victor briefs them about the island, explaining that trade routes avoid it and that it is constantly surrounded by storms, making it hidden. However, General Packard has advanced aircraft that will help them enter the island, making them the first team in history to explore it. The mission leaders include Bill, biologist San, and geologist Brooks. Brooks explains that they will drop bombs on the island to measure the Earth's density. Soldier Chapman mentions that the storms around the island will cut off communication with the outside world, leaving them isolated until the supply team arrives in 3 days at the island's northern point. The supply team will bring weapons, food, and water. The group sets off on the ship towards Skull Island. As they approach, they see that the storm surrounding the island is larger than expected. Victor suggests postponing the mission, but Bill disagrees and insists on continuing. The final decision is left to Packard, who decides to proceed. The team boards their aircraft and flies toward the island, entering the intense storm filled with rain and lightning. The planes shake violently, but Packard's advanced aircraft withstand the storm, and they successfully reach the island. The island is revealed to be beautiful with natural landscapes. They fly over the island until they find a clearing to land and set up their equipment. Everything goes smoothly until suddenly a giant tree is hurled at one of the planes, destroying it completely. Another plane witnesses the event and sees a massive hand grabbing their aircraft. The soldiers on board see Kong, who destroys the plane and eats one of the soldiers. The remaining planes circle around Kong, terrified by his appearance. Kong roars at them, prompting them to open fire, but the bullets have no effect on him and only anger him further. Kong strikes a plane with his hand, bringing it down. He tries to grab another plane, injuring his hand on its propeller, causing it to crash into the jungle. Packard orders a support team to assist the downed plane, but Kong crushes the support team underfoot, killing them. Kong destroys all the surrounding planes, killing any humans he encounters on the ground. Packard's plane narrowly escapes the chaos. Kong throws a soldier into the air, who collides with the plane carrying Jason and Mason, causing it to crash into the jungle. Kong grabs a plane from the ground and throws it at another plane in the air, only stopping once he has destroyed all the aircraft around him. Packard watches in shock as Kong leaves the area. Due to the events, the team splits into 2 groups. Jason's group realizes they are near the river and must head north to reach the supply point, as there is no other way off the island since all the planes have been destroyed. Meanwhile, Packard contacts the survivors, and Chapman responds, informing him that he is the sole survivor from his plane. Chapman gives his location to Packard before the signal cuts off. Packard searches the area, gathering the remaining soldiers. He then meets Bill, sits with him, and points a weapon at him, and he says to him, "Tell me the truth. Why did you come to this island?" Bill begins to tell the truth. 20 years ago, I was on a ship with my family, and mythical creatures attacked the ship. I was the only survivor, and all my family died. I kept telling everyone that mythical creatures attacked us, and that these these creatures exist, but no one believed me. The government announced that those on the ship drowned. To prove I was telling the truth, I started studying mythical creatures, ones like Kong, but I couldn't prove they existed. So I decided to return to the island and invent any excuse to convince the council to send a military team with me. I threw bombs on the island to make Kong appear. My goal wasn't to explore the island. It was to document the gorilla and mythical creatures with witnesses to see what happened. Packard gets very angry at his trivial reason for gathering everyone on the island, especially since many of his men died because of him. But he decides to let Bill live. He decides to head west first to find Chapman, and after finding him, they'll head north to reach the rendezvous point. They hold a funeral for the soldiers who died, and Packard vows to avenge his men from Kong. We then go to James's team, where Brooks tells them, Bill hired me because I'm skilled in geology, but he never mentioned the giant gorilla that just attacked us. Later, James's team tries to communicate with the others, but the signal is cut off. They pass by a lake and suddenly see a giant buffalo in front of them. A team member named Silvaco raises his weapon at it, but James makes him lower it because the buffalo was calm and did not attack them. The buffalo looks at them for a while, then leaves peacefully. Meanwhile, Packard's group searches for Chapman in the jungle. While walking, one of the soldiers is killed by a large stick that goes through his mouth. When they look up, they discover that the stick is the leg of a giant spider. The soldiers panic and start shooting at it, but the spider grabs one of them, Miles. The soldiers stop shooting and start cutting the spider's legs to save their comrade. Miles cuts the spider's feelers, manages to escape, and falls to the ground. They open fire on the spider and kill it completely. They continue their journey, but their morale drops as more soldiers die. We return to James's team, who walk several kilometers and reach a place resembling a temple. As they inspect the area, a tribe appears and raises knives at them. An old man emerges from the tribe and introduces himself to James's team, saying, "My name is Hank." It turns out that Hank is the American officer we saw at the beginning of the World War II scene in 1944. Hank has been on the island since then, living there for 29 years with the tribe. The tribe lives in a small village, and they adore Kong, revering him as a deity. Kong also loves them and protects them from dangerous creatures. Hank explains that the tribe lives in fear of the mythical creatures until Kong's parents appeared and began protecting the tribe. After many battles, Kong's parents fought the creatures. Unfortunately, Kong's parents died, and Kong became the king of the island. His life's mission is to protect the tribe. He tells them that Kong attacked them because they threw bombs, awakening the mythical creatures. Kong had to engage in battles with many creatures in a short time. Luckily, the strongest creature among them hasn't appeared yet. This creature killed Kong's parents and is currently resting after its battle with them. But it's only a matter of time before it awakens, and no one knows if Kong will survive to confront it. We quickly shift to Chapman, who was washing in the water. Chapman is startled when Kong arrives at the lake. Chapman runs in fear and hides. We see Kong injured in his arm from his fight with the soldiers. Chapman watches as Kong drinks from the water. Suddenly, a giant squid attacks Kong, wrapping around him. Kong fights it, crushes its head, eats its tentacles, and leaves the lake after defeating it. Back at the village, James tells Hank they are heading north because there are supplies waiting there, and they plan to escape the island. Hank tells them, "I know this island very well, and let me tell you, if you travel on foot, there's no way you'll reach the northern part of the island within 3 days. The path is too long." Hank shows them a boat he has been building from the remains of 2 planes. After the Japanese pilot died from one of the creatures, Hank couldn't finish the boat alone. James decides to help Hank complete the boat. Mason wanders around, filming the tribe. She hears a strange sound and decides to investigate. She finds a giant buffalo trapped under a plane and unable to move. Mason decides to rescue it, trying to lift the plane off it. She struggles but is unable to. Suddenly, Kong arrives, lifts the plane, and throws it aside. He does nothing to Mason and leaves. We return to Packard, who is still heading west. He and his men see a giant bloodstain on the mountain and realize it's Kong's blood, giving them hope that they can kill him. We shift back to Chapman, who tries to communicate with Packard. Chapman is shocked to find himself sitting on a mythical creature disguised as a tree. Chapman grabs his weapon and shoots at it in fear, but the creature turns out to be harmless and walks away. However, the creature leaves because a dangerous monster appears and eats Chapman's head. After 24 hours, James and Hank are still working on the boat. They finally manage to finish it and set off north. Hank is hopeful about returning to his homeland. While on the boat, the radio starts working, and they manage to communicate with Packard's team. They ask Packard's team to light a flare in the sky to signal their location. Packard's team lights the flare, and the 2 groups locate each other. James's team on the boat celebrates. Suddenly, without warning, pterosaurs grab Victor and fly off with him. They tear his body apart in a horrifying scene. Hank and the others watch helplessly. Despite the tragedy, they decide to press on and meet up with Packard's team. The 2 teams finally reunite. Packard tells them, "Chapman is still alive, and I'm continuing west to find him." Hank objects, saying, "There are giant lizards in the west. If we go there, we'll put ourselves in danger." Packard tells James, "Your job is to track anything, so you should help us find Chapman." James agrees, and the entire team moves westward. They arrive at a place where there are skeletons of Kong's parents, and their tomb is filled with sulfur gas. They are forced to pass through the tomb to reach the other side. While they are halfway through, one of the soldiers sets off a jar symbol on the ground, which contains flammable materials, causing a massive chemical explosion. This explosion attracts the attention of a giant lizard. The team notices the lizard, so they hide behind the skeletons. The giant lizard approaches James, but suddenly it retreats to its nest. From the nest, it throws out Chapman's skull and chain, and James realizes that Chapman is dead. He remains still until the lizard leaves. Once it's gone, the entire team emerges from their hiding spot. Meanwhile, Bill had been filming the area with his camera, but unfortunately, the camera malfunctions, flickering on and off. This light attracts the lizard, which swallows Bill whole before disappearing into the smoke. After this incident, the team splits up, each member taking a position to kill the lizard. Hank, who is familiar with this creature, takes the lead, waiting for it to attack. When it approaches, he manages to dodge it and strikes its legs with his sword. The soldiers open fire on the lizard, which runs at full speed toward one of the soldiers and swallows him. It then chases Mason, but Mason runs into a narrow area the lizard cannot navigate. Packard sends one of his men with flammable materials to set the lizard on fire, but the lizard throws him instead, causing an explosion due to the flammable substances he was carrying. Silvko, who was near the explosion, loses consciousness, and a gas hatch opens beside him, releasing birds. The soldiers shoot at the birds. Jason grabs Hank's sword, puts on a mask, and enters a smoke-filled area. He bravely fights and kills the birds until he reaches Silvko. However, the lizard arrives at their location. Luckily, Mason intervenes and throws a flare at the lizard, causing a massive explosion due to the sulfur in the air. The lizard explodes, and the team escapes the tomb and continues on their way. Hank tells Packard that he warned them not to take this path because it's full of giant creatures, and this lizard was only the first of them. Packard, still determined to kill Kong, ignores everyone's objections. The team tries to explain that Kong is a good creature and not as dangerous as they thought, and they explain why Kong attacked them, but Packard refuses to listen and insists on killing Kong for revenge. Hank becomes angry, draws his sword on Packard, but Packard disarms him. Packard's soldiers side with him. Jason calms the situation down, telling Packard to go to the rendezvous point with his men to get weapons and supplies as he wishes, while Jason and his team return to the boat and wait for them. They agree and split into two groups again. On their way, Packard and his men find Chapman's belongings and take them to return to his family. They begin setting up an ambush for Kong. Meanwhile, James and Mason climb a mountain to look for the boat and spot it in the middle of the river. Suddenly, Kong appears in front of them. Kong allows Mason to touch him, as he senses she is good and was trying to save the buffalo earlier. He does not react aggressively. Meanwhile, Packard's team causes explosions in the forest to attract Kong's attention. Kong moves toward the explosions, and Jason, Mason, and Hank realize it's a trap and rush to save Kong. Kong reaches the soldiers and roars, walking through the water, searching for the source of the explosions. Packard throws flammable materials into the water, setting Kong on fire. At first, Kong suffers intense pain and struggles to move, but he eventually frees himself from the flames and crushes one of the soldiers with his foot. Exhausted, Kong collapses to the ground. Packard orders the soldiers to place explosives around Kong to kill him for good. However, the soldiers hesitate after witnessing Kong's suffering. Jason and Mason arrive, defending Kong and pointing their weapons at Packard and his soldiers. The situation escalates, with everyone pointing weapons at each other. Silvko turns against Packard and raises his weapon. Jason urges everyone to lower their weapons, but their argument is interrupted by a loud noise from the water. A larger, more menacing lizard emerges, the same creature that killed Kong's parents. Everyone flees except Packard, who stays to activate the explosives and kill Kong. But Kong regains consciousness, grabs Packard, and crushes him in his hand. Kong engages in a fierce battle with the lizard. Being injured and exhausted, Kong struggles, and the lizard gains the upper hand. The team reaches the edge of the island to save themselves, but some members are still far behind. Jason asks Mason to climb the highest mountain and fire a flare into the sky to signal the rest of the team. As Mason moves to do so, the lizard approaches the team. One of the soldiers sacrifices himself to buy time for the others to escape, and he takes out all his grenades and stands in front of the lizard. But his sacrifice was in vain, as the lizard struck him with its tail and threw him into the air, and the soldier died with his grenades. And everyone thinks the lizard will win, but Kong arrives and strikes the lizard on the head with force, but the lizard is not affected, and the lizard goes to strangle Kong's neck, and Kong grabs the lizard's jaw to free himself, and he was about to split it in two, but the lizard escaped from him and went to grab Kong's arm, and it wrapped around Kong and pushed him towards an old shipwreck, and Kong got stuck in the ship's chains and couldn't get free. And despite being tied up, Kong makes a great effort in the battle, and everyone thinks this is the end, but Brooks opens fire on the lizard with a weapon on the boat, so the lizard leaves Kong and heads towards him, and Mason hits the lizard in the eye with a flare, so the lizard can't see well, and Kong makes a great effort to free himself, and he succeeds in getting up again, but there was still a chain attached to his arm that was connected to the ship's propeller, so Kong throws the propeller at the lizard's back and goes to it and strangles the lizard with the chain, and then he grabs the lizard and throws it onto the mountain that Mason was standing on, so Mason falls from the top of the mountain into the water. The lizard tried to attack Kong again, but Kong was able to land several blows to its face, causing it severe damage and making it faint, and then Kong reached his hand into the water and pulled Mason out, and Kong remembers that everything is now fine, but the lizard deceives him and attacks him again from behind, wrapping its tongue around Kong's arm. But Kong's strength was immense, and he pulled the lizard's tongue completely, separating it from its body, and with that, the lizard finally died, and Kong avenged the death of his father and mother. After that, Kong finally looks at them and walks away, and all the people who managed to survive Tango agreed not to speak about what happened on the island ever, so the animals could live in peace. Hank was eager to return home and see his wife and son, whom he hadn't seen in 29 years. They reached the meeting point where planes were waiting for them, and with that, we come to the end of the episode. If you liked the video, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification button so you never miss an updates.